Happy Death Day just came out like a week ago, and I love it. I love all the scenes in it that feel like they exist only to have a good time. I love how cheesy and over the top it is. I love that it was a Groundhog Day thing. I'm a sucker for Groundhog Day things.
I am an immortal.
But I thought that Happy Death Day was more than just a great popcorn movie. Because on the surface, it looks like a pretty standard teenage slasher film. It has the masked murderer, the girl who runs away, the stabbing. But when you look closer, you see that this film is working really hard to buck some of the most important elements of this genre. See that even as it acts sort of like a 1980s horror movie, it doesn't feel like one or create meaning like one. So that's this video. Happy Death Day, Reinventing the Slasher Film. 2 disclaimers. 1. I'm going to be spoiling like all of Happy Death Day, but really it's not a movie with a ton of really important twists, so it doesn't matter too much. 2. Happy Death Day just came out, so I don't have that much footage from it to use in this essay. So you're gonna have to bear with me a little. Sometimes I'll make a point about the movie that I won't be able to prove with a bit of film. So let's get started. Before I can talk about how Happy Death Day deviates from traditional teen slashers, I have to, talk about teen slashers, how they work and what they're trying to do. I think the most important thing about 70s and 80s slasher films like Halloween or Friday the 13th is that they generate most of their meaning through the interaction of various aesthetic choices. While most media makes statements through plot and character, slasher films emphasize viscera to the exclusion of all else. Specifically, they're constructed around 3 visceral experiences: sex, voyeurism, and gore. We start off the slasher film in a world of adolescent sexuality. There are always teenagers, and they're always in the process of having sex with each other. Scenes of nudity, shots of teen girl butts, exist with the express purpose of titillating presumed straight male audiences. This eroticism is framed with a sense of voyeurism. The camera of the slasher film is always positioned from a very specific and distant vantage point. Oftentimes, the audience sees what the killer is seeing as he stalks his prey, so we have this feeling like we're not in the scene, we're not part of this intimate moment, we're weirdly watching it like a bunch of perverts in the corner. And ultimately, sexual expression in these films is punished with a gory death at the hands of a madman.
That's nice.
Slasher films describe a visceral process. People are boning, we're weirdly watching them bone, and in the end, they die because they boned. And through that process, the movies generate meaning. They're about pleasure, sexual and otherwise. They're about film's odd relationship to pleasure, the fact that we can witness pleasure unfold, but never truly access it in a meaningful way. And they're about the anxieties associated with pleasure, the fact that it makes us vulnerable. The protagonists of these movies are basically absent and uncharacterized. The antagonists are masked and blank. There's rarely a sense of real motivation.
It's the millennium. Motives are incidental.
And these absences allow the movies to be about what they're really about: sex and voyeurism and gore, and the meanings those things produce. But Happy Death Day isn't like that. In fact, it works really hard to not be like that. There's not one sex scene in this movie, even though there were plenty of opportunities to have had one.
His name's Carter. We didn't have sex.
The movie lacks a sense of voyeurism. It's shot to make us feel like we're intimately connected to the main character, not watching her from a distance. And as far as gore goes, this movie just doesn't have interesting gore. Like, she gets killed a bunch, but the Groundhog Day narrative always makes it so the audience can't revel in that killing. She gets killed, she wakes up, and everything's okay. More importantly though, Happy Death Day doesn't have the same purity of form that traditional slasher films have. Doesn't have the absent protagonists and antagonists that would enable it to focus exclusively on viscera. Tree constantly curses and wisecracks her way through the movie. She's a character in her own right, and we're constantly made aware of that. The antagonist bumbles their way through the film, making constant mistakes and tripping over themselves the entire time. At the end of the movie, there's a great scene where we realize that the babyface killer isn't some demented, unmotivated sociopath. She's Tree's roommate.
You've been killing me over some stupid guy?
Oh, that's not the only reason.
You're a dumb bitch, too!
And she's a person, a weird, hilarious person. There's just no way for us to see these figures as empty aesthetic objects. They're not blank enough or broad enough for that. But Happy Death Day isn't just interesting because it avoids creating meaning with viscera. It's also interesting because it avoids creating meaning, period. Tree starts off the movie selfish and annoying, and we're led to believe that she's stuck in a Groundhog Day loop because she has to better herself. So she betters herself. On her second to last day, she's a nice person. She stands up to people. She allows herself to like the nerdy guy she likes.
Hey, I have to run, but what are you doing later?
But as it turns out, none of these noble gestures do anything. After having a totally nice day, she wakes up, still in the time loop. It turns out the answer was never bettering herself. It was literally just killing the person who kept killing her. That's it. The film opens up this possibility space that it could be about values or selflessness. But right at the end, it closes that space, rejects the idea that it's about those things, rejects the idea that it's about anything, really. Horror films have a long pedigree of connecting themselves to anxiety. They're about contagion, disease, sexual promiscuity.
I am Dracula.
They're about science going too far, or about our hidden shadow side. They're about consumerism and mall culture. So it only makes sense to ask, what anxiety does Happy Death Day express? And I think the answer to that question is this film is really concerned with the process by which media creates meaning. At every level of this work, aesthetic and thematic, there's a tension, a feeling that it wants to be saying something, or that it's approaching some conviction, or that it should have a message. But no matter how hard you look, no such meaning exists. There's just no coherent idea that we can squeeze from this rock. It's weird and off-putting and refreshing. Happy Death Day isn't afraid of the masked blade-wielding figure. It's afraid of the idea that his presence in the film says anything about sex or society or the way we live our lives. It's a really cool premise for a film, and if you haven't seen it, I think it's worth your time. Pretty creepy video, right? Pretty spooky stuff. Maybe go ahead and maybe comment and subscribe on it too. Why not? Just give me another chance.